And we definitely, when we said what we talk about multi-denominational, we mean that the children of Protestants, Catholic or Catholics, Protestants, whichever order way you like to put them in, Catholics, Protestants, or others, have equal right of access. You know, so
It was great. Did everybody agree in the startup group? So you're telling us about this
meeting,
a very early meeting.
It hadn't quite ever arisen as an issue,
right?
Until that moment.
Yes, and that moment was the sort of defining moment. There would have been a few people who hadn't quite taken that on board,
right?
And suddenly hearing that this was not going to be a Christian school that they could say their children were at. I think it did matter to a few people, but not. And most people thought on it very carefully and decided, yes, that's right, we're going to have no outsiders.
Well, you know what, it would have been an extraordinary sort of feeling occasionally the people would have, that, you know, only Christians, you know, believed in good and evil, whereas in fact you look through lots of other religions and lots of other people without religion at all, a lot of people believe in good and evil there too.
Yeah. So was that controversial at the time?
No, it wasn't. It was raised that once. It was raised that once, and people then understood it. And thereafter, we always said, when we talk about multi-denominational, this is what we mean. So, you know, don't. And what happened many times when this came up again, a Catholic, you know, official who was in charge of, you know, declaring what their position would talk about what he called, but he would never admit that multi-denominational could be used to describe what we were doing.
Right.
In spite of the fact that we said this is what we're talking about when we say multi-denominational. We're not going to argue about semantics about this. This is what we're talking about. And so don't, or what they would tend to do, they would set this thing up and say, that's not multi-denominational, that's something totally different.
Secular.
And secular or whatever, you know. And
was that term used to describe the schools by other people at the time?
Occasionally it was.
Occasionally, but you know, I was going to say the aficionados knew exactly why they were sending their children to the school, and they weren't going to.
And how do you feel nearly 40 years later, having been around as part of the startup group, to see more and more educate together schools opening
It's fantastic. I regret to say I'm rather inclined when I hear it being talked about to start crying, you know, because it is a wonderful change, and we couldn't have anticipated this at all in the early days.
Yeah.
But some of the key people had this extraordinary determination that if we stuck to our guns and we kept on doing it, and we refused to have people turn the thing round and put a different hypothesis and then say, that's no good, we can't have it. If we stuck to our guns, we'd be all right. We rarely, for example, had any trouble with, we were pretty good at handling the press and at handling the media and so on. And we wanted to use, we were very careful about the language we used. For example, this thing about defining what we meant by multi-denominational was one of the